Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde. We are back with my strategic summary for episode 4 of the Traitors US Season 3. Out of the gate, I'll say that this was the best episode of the season so far. We got an interesting murder at the top of the episode, which was followed by some classic Boston Rob gameplay. I did not expect a traitor to go out this early, so I have a lot of thoughts to share. Let's hop right in. Starting with the Coffin Twist, the Traitors found time to separate themselves from the rest of the group to select 3 names for the chopping block. Gabby hears Danielle's voice from the cellar, which creates some suspicion surrounding her, but she's able to dispose of that by the end of the episode. The Traitors need to murder one of 3 players, and we can hit on each of these individually. By cutting Nikki, they could break up that Bambi alliance between her, Gabby, and Chrishell. Getting rid of Sierra could serve as your anonymous elimination. Sierra has not received much screen time this season, but as far as I know, she's working with the majority and avoiding that leadership role during roundtables. There isn't a huge benefit in taking out Sierra, but there's also little risk. I think that a Sierra boot would not create suspicion in any specific direction. The final option is Jeremy, who had been actively campaigning against Danielle for the past couple episodes. Removing Jeremy from the game would push the target off of Danielle, and that's what they elect to do. Jeremy is the 3rd player murdered this season, and I was devastated. Jeremy was probably my favorite contestant on the entire cast. I love his win on Survivor Cambodia from both a strategic and storyline perspective. As for his appearance on this show, I think that Jeremy's play was up and down. He had some correct reads like pinpointing Danielle as a traitor and Tony as a faithful, but there were also some horrible decisions like his loyalty to Rob and Carolyn. The entire reason why Danielle even knows that Jeremy is gunning for her is because he shared this plan with Carolyn, who leaked it back to Danielle. So I understand why this move benefits Danielle's game and by extension Bob's game, as the 2 of them are aligned. I don't really agree with this move from the perspective of either Carolyn or Boston Rob. Jeremy appeared fully loyal to both of them. A big part of this game is finding people who are willing to ride with you to the end. Who knows if Jeremy sticks by their sides for the long run, but he was at the very least a safe ally for the short term. The other risk with cutting Jeremy here is that the target widens a bit more on the remaining Survivor players. Every previous season has featured at least one traitor from Survivor. I could see a world where, with Jeremy gone, the cast decides to cut another gamer. Last thing I'd throw out with Jeremy's game is his final confessional, where once again he brings up the fact that he's competing for his family, which is just classic Jeremy. To me, this confessional was really reminiscent of his final tribal council speech on Survivor Cambodia. The key difference there is that this moment comes from a place of devastation, whereas his speech on Survivor is based more in hope. But all of that is to say that I'm upset we lost Jeremy so early. I think that he's an incredible player and character on these types of shows. From a player perspective, I predicted before this season that Jeremy would perform the best out of the 4 Survivor contestants. Then from a character perspective, Jeremy is not someone that will pop off screen immediately, especially when you put him next to the likes of Bob the Drag Queen and Carolyn. Over time, though, Jeremy comes forward as a compelling character. He's gritty, he's charismatic, he's funny, but he just wasn't around long enough for us to see those sides of him. Moving ahead to the mission, players were tasked with building a total of 10 statues, and in doing so, they would award shields to 10 players. Here are the 10 safe contestants on the board, and here are the vulnerable players going into next week's episode. Of the 8 people here, I see 3 of them in real danger. Derek is more than likely safe due to his connection to Danielle. Danielle just lost Bob the Drag Queen as her #1 ally, so I doubt that she would be willing to give up on Derek. Robin is consistently loud and incorrect with her various strategic reads, so I don't see the Traitors getting much out of taking her out. Nikki and Sierra received some heat this week due to their inclusion in the Coffin Twist. The Traitors should keep them around as potential shields for next week. That leaves 3 primary targets in Ivor, Gabby, and Sam. Ivor had his name thrown out last week following the Dorinda murder. He also does not seem to have many close allies in the castle, so I think he should be okay. In a similar way, I don't know who Sam has connected with thus far due to his lack of screen time. He could get murdered next week as a safe safe play that doesn't paint a target on any of the Traitors' backs. Then we get to Gabby, who I view as the optimal murder for episode 5. She's well connected in the Bambi alliance, and she's starting to grow suspicious of Danielle. The only issue with knocking out Gabby is that it potentially resolves Nikki of any guilt. If you want to keep the pressure on both Nikki and Sierra, you probably need to keep Gabby around. So leading up to the round table, there were 3 main targets in the castle. First up, you had Nikki. It looks like Nikki was the original consensus target going into that night due to her position in the Coffin Twist. Many people consider writing Nikki's name, but the edit highlights Wes as the leader of this operation. Sierra's name was written down for the exact same reason. Sierra maintains fewer alliances than Nikki, so there's just less people advocating for her safety. Derek and Gabby are presented as the head players pushing for Sierra. And then we get to the big move of the season in the targeting of Bob the Drag Queen. Dylan pushed for Bob last week at the round table, but he was unable to gain any traction and no one else voted with him. Even at the start of the episode, it looked like Dylan still did not have the numbers in place to take out Bob. Everything changes at the mission where Bob claims that one of the cage guys could be a traitor. That comment causes Boston Rob to jump into action mode. On the surface, I don't hate this decision to target Bob. In order for Rob to have any longevity on this season, he needs to earn favor with the other faithfuls, and an easy way to accomplish that is by sacrificing a traitor. Of the 3 traitors for Rob to target, Bob is probably the best option. He's been out in front leading roundtable discussions where he's never correct. It makes sense to target Bob under this idea that he's directly throwing the group off of the traitor's scent. Plus, by knocking out Bob here, Rob can break up that tight-knit pair of Bob and Danielle. That duo intended on rolling to the end together, which would have required them to cut Rob at some point. All of that makes sense. At the end of the day, though, I still disagree with this move by Boston Rob. First, you have the component of timing. At some point, you need to cut a fellow traitor, but I think that the 3rd round table with 18 remaining contestants is just way too early. Rob was not under much pressure, so I don't think he needed to make this big play to gain trust with the other faithfuls. Second, you have the publicity of this elimination. Last week, I credited Boston Rob for his under-the-radar approach through the first 3 episodes. I was surprised that Rob had pivoted away from his usual domineering tactics that we see on Survivor. Of course, immediately after complimenting him, Rob goes behind my back and falls into his normal tendencies. He speaks up at the round table and paints the target on Bob in front of the entire cast. He walks away receiving the most credit for that move, which creates suspicion around him. In an ideal world, Rob would plant the seed for the Bob boot, then allow Dylan to take the lead and credit. Last aspect of this vote to mention with Rob is that it creates distrust amidst his fellow traitors. For Rob to pull off this move, he needed to consult and earn the approval from Carolyn beforehand. Instead, he tells both Carolyn and Danielle just moments before the roundtable. Looking forward, the 2 of them could respond and band together against Rob. We get to the roundtable where 11 out of 18 votes fall onto Bob. It's worth noting that all 3 traitors voted in that direction. That could serve to protect them for the next couple weeks. Danielle, in particular, deserves a lot of credit for this decision. I assume that it was very hard for her on both a strategic and personal level to lose Bob, but she was still willing to vote for him if it meant staying in the majority. So Bob is the first traitor banished from the game. I said this last week, but Bob's approach to the game was one that would make for a more difficult route to the end. Bob was consistently one of the most vocal people at the round table, which is a difficult spot to hide in as a traitor. By taking on that leadership role, Bob was working to push the group away from the other traitors, and after a period of time of constantly missing the mark, the group starts to question that figurehead. So that positioning likely factored into Bob's boot, but I also see this elimination as a tactic for advancing Rob in the game. Theoretically, this move serves to paint Rob as a faithful to the rest of the group, which is good for him. Plus, Bob seemed like the strongest voice in the traitors' murder decisions. By cutting Bob, Rob could gain agency in the tower. So while Bob was around for just 4 episodes, I really enjoyed his time on the show. He was the only player selected as a traitor who did not originally come from a social strategy show. Despite that, he was able to position himself well in that group and lock down a number 1 in Danielle. As a character, Bob makes incredible TV. Him calling Dylan misguided last week was hilarious. Then this week he tells Dylan that his brother is a bad actor. I'll miss having Bob around on the show, but who knows, maybe production looks to recruit a new traitor in the next couple episodes, which could be interesting. Here's an updated look at the season's strategic layout. It's actually tragic that the Survivor Alliance has completely crumbled in the first 4 episodes. This week, Rob locks down Dylan as his new #1 ally, but now other players are suspicious of him, and Danielle is not going to be happy with him when the traitors meet. I also added in the pressure on both Nikki and Sierra from the Coffin Twist. That takes us to the weekly tier list, where I rank every contestant's chances of winning the season. In the bottom tier 0 chance, I have all the players who are either invisible in the edit or horrible at the game itself. You got people like Sam, who has just 1 confessional through the first 4 episodes. Meanwhile, contestants like Sierra and Ivor only pop up on screen when they're targeted, but outside that, we don't get much from them. Robin and Tom are arguably the 2 worst players on the cast. I consistently disagree with their strategic decisions. Robin's move this week to publicly call out the traitors at the breakfast was ridiculous. Within this group, I have the most confidence in Dolores, who seems well connected within the cast. This week, we see her approve of the Bob vote, but she's careful as to not take the lead in that operation. On to the second tier unlikely victories. Bob H moved up due to all of his personal content during the mission. The show is starting to build a storyline with Bob H, which is not the case for anyone else in the tier below. Chriselle and Nikki land in this tier. I see them as the supporting characters of the Bambi Alliance. It's great that they've built those bonds in the castle, but their edits pale in comparison to Gabby, who I view as the head of that trio. Nikki has some suspicion around her going into next week due to the Coffin Twist. 2 of the traitors fall into this category. I feel like the show is building towards this battle between Danielle and Rob. I don't see that dispute faring well for either of them. Ideally, Rob would fly under the radar after the Bob boot, but I think that Danielle will gun for him in the near future. Danielle successfully took Jeremy out of the game in this episode, but there's still people in the house who suspect her as a traitor. Moving on to high upside, we got 3 gamers and Gabby. Like I said earlier, Gabby is painted as the strategic figurehead of the Bambi Alliance. She's got the 2nd most confessionals of any faithful, and she's potentially targeting Danielle following the entire saga with the seller. If Gabby can survive this upcoming murder, I like her chances long term. I moved Brittany up to this tier partially due to my general confidence in her as a contestant in these types of games. Brittany wants to take on an under-the-radar approach, and thus far, she's been surviving round to round undetected. No one is really eyeing up Brittany as a potential traitor. I could see her making a deep run. Wes jumped up to high upside as well. He's incorrect this week in the targeting of Nikki, but we see him point the finger at Rob towards the end of the episode. If Wes can gather the numbers against Rob, he could earn a lot of favor with the rest of the castle. Last high upside player is Derek. On one hand, we see Derek forming connections with other players during the mission by helping them build their statues. Derek also has an alliance with Danielle, who will likely campaign for his safety even harder now that Bob is out of the game. All of that is great for Derek, but his reads are not great thus far. He votes against Sierra at the round table, which could create some suspicion in the future. Finally, there's the same 2 people in my contenders tier. Carolyn, in my opinion, continues to play the best traitors game on the cast. She's allowing the other faithfuls and traitors to cannibalize each other while she fades into the background. It's not a dominant game by any means, but her goal should be reaching the end, not carving her path to that point. I still look at Carolyn as the most likely winner if a traitor comes out on top. I debated dropping Dylan down to the high upside tier because he receives some degree of credit for the Bob vote. At the end of the day, though, I think that this cast will perceive that move as a stamp on Boston Rob's resume, not Dylan's, due to Rob's reputation and his approach at the roundtable. This might be the ideal outcome for Dylan, where he's proven to make correct reads to the rest of the cast, but he's not out in front with those reads. So that's everything I got for this week. Like I said, I think this was the best episode of the season so far. Come back next week where I'll provide my insights on episode 5, and thank you for watching.